Welcome back to another podcast. My name is Dr. B. I hope you all are having a fantastic week. This week in the podcast, we are going to be playing with video filters, and so as we transition, we'll be doing a lot of that. But anyway. We are going to be continuing with cardiovascular physiology. So, cardiovascular physiology. Dom, can you tell us what we covered last week? Just to do a little refresh, since we are still on the cardiovascular area.
Last week, we primarily focused on the EKG and looking at depolarization, repolarization waves, and learning about vectors and
Right.
putting it all together, going over different. I know Caleb reviewed some EKG
Right.
pathologies. And so this week, we're going to be going over the last sort of big area in cardiophysiology, which is PV loops.
Right. Very good. So remember that we are not, the goal of this podcast is not to reteach the subject matter from the ground up, right? Those are for the lectures and also for your review time with the GTAs, and then also your attendance, right, and asking questions at the town hall. The point is to sort of refresh and review and go over in a manner that just sort of gives you another medium in which you can, intake physiology. So, okay, so let's go ahead and get started with PV loops. So if I could get Dom, or could you just look up a PV loop, a standard PV loop on the web, and just a simple one with without a bunch of words and everything, and then just share your screen, and we'll go from there. All right.
There we go.
All right, I think he's sharing it. Here it comes. But while he's looking for that, I'm going to go ahead and introduce the topic. So PV loop. So P stands for pressure, V stands for volume. So you've got volume on the y-axis, or sorry, pressure on the y-axis. So that's the P. And then you have the volume on the x-axis, right? So if the vertical axis is going to be the pressure, and the volume is going to be on the y-axis. And when we talk about pressure volume loops, that's good, that works. Except Hunter's head is right in the middle of the pressure volume loop. There we go, Hunter. So when we talk about pressure volume loops, we're referring to the pressure and the volume not anywhere in the body, right? We're referring to the pressure and the volume mainly in the left ventricle. Now, there are PV loops that you can look up, that you can draw, that you can have that are associated with the right ventricle. But by default, at least for the scope of this course, if it doesn't say, and it's just like this, right? We're not able to really tell if it's the left or right ventricle. Now, one way to tell would be to, let me go ahead and I think I can annotate on here, captions, no meeting info. I think I can annotate this. Let me see. I think there's a way. Full screen, change theme. Let me go up here, annotate, there we go. So what we would do is we'd look on the pressure. So I drew a red line for the pressure right there. And we would look at that. And if we would see a pressure that's, say, because this is where, D happens, right? So say this is, let me actually erase that. Let's go back. And we're going to have the pressure essentially be right there, okay? So that's the pressure, right? And the pressure is 120, right? Sorry, this is hard to draw with a mouse. Then we know which ventricle are we talking about? Haley. Haley has no volume. We've had some struggles. Nadine, we're talking about the left. That's exactly right. We're talking about the left ventricle because the right ventricle does not reach pressures of 120 millimeters of mercury, right? The right ventricle is going to reach maybe like 25 or something around there.
Am I in here? Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Oh,
Very
yeah,
good.
so sorry.
Did you get it? Are you still on the phone audio or?
Yeah, no, I'm on the phone. It just keeps like shutting down. I have to watch it and tap it. Sorry.
Gotcha. Which reminds me, a word from our sponsor is going to be coming up here pretty soon.
I have it.
Okay, what a great time to hear a word from our sponsors before we jump in. Haley, take it away.
Yeah, before you lose me again. We really want to thank Frank Starling's Fitness Club for being our sponsor today. Frank Starling's Fitness Club, where the more you stretch, the stronger you get. Remember, it's not overload, it's preload. Let's lengthen those sarcomeres and feel the stroke volume gains.
All
Thank
right,
you.
you heard it here first, folks. We heard it from the Frank Starling's Fitness. So we're gonna hold off for the other sponsors of this podcast. We're gonna intersperse them throughout the podcast. But yeah, so don't forget to stretch. Remember, it's not afterload; it's preload, folks. Frank Starling mechanism. Don't forget to like and subscribe. So with the left ventricle, diving right back into what we were talking about. The left ventricle is going to be a lot stronger, right? Because remember, the right ventricle is the pump for the pulmonary circuit. That is a shorter and lower pressure circuit. And the left ventricle is the pump for the systemic circuit. It is the longer and higher pressure circuit, okay? So if we were to graph, if we were to stick a catheter, right? And a catheter is just a tube, essentially, with some either holes on the end, or it could have electrodes on the end. And this is what we do when we do a pressure volume loop. We catheterize the left ventricle, right? So we stick a catheter in the left ventricle. Pray tell, how would we do that? Well, you can go down the carotid, right? You can go to the carotid to the aorta to the left ventricle, right? So that's one way to do it. And you would basically stick a catheter into the left ventricle of the heart. Now, there are other ways they can do that. They can go up through a femoral vein, right? And go through the venous side, go through the right side, and basically pop right through the atrial septum, the interatrial septum, and then go down in the left ventricle that way. But either way, we're not really concerned too much with the methodology by which we are able to do PV loops, but let's talk about the physiology and the physiological knowledge that PV loops can give us. So we see volume over here. So we're going to start at a volume of 70, right? So that's a good volume in the heart to start with. And then point B, we'll say, is going to be about 140, okay? So when we go from 70 all the way to 140, and then we go back from 140 to 70, that's telling us one of the criteria, or one of the characteristics of the heart, one of the things we can measure, which is called stroke volume. So stroke volume is the amount of blood ejected from the heart in one beat, or one systolic contraction. We call contraction systole, and we call relaxation diastole in cardiovascular physiology. So we've got a low volume, right? A low volume of 70 and a high volume of 140. So once we're looking at the heart, left ventricle, when is the left ventricle going to have the lowest volume? Is it after it contracts, or right before it contracts? What do you guys think?
After it contracts.
There you go. Thank you. Yeah, James, it's after contraction, right? So after contraction, that's when it's going to have the lowest volume. So we call that, and we said contraction is called systole. So the 70, or what we would refer to right here, we're going to point to, that's what is that? D, point D right there. D is in dog, right? Or dom, right? I'm not saying you're a dog. I'm just saying the D is the thing, right? We love clarifying today's age. But we refer to that as end systolic volume. So point D is ESV. So end systolic volume. Okay. Anybody else can annotate at the same time, GTA. So if you want to jump in here, so I don't have to use my terrible mouse handwriting. If you're any better, feel free to take over and annotate as well. So ESV, this is end systolic volume. And then over here, we call this EDV, end diastolic volume, right? So that is the volume at the end of diastole, or right before systole, or systolic contraction. Okay. Now these points are often referred to as end diastolic volume and end systolic volume. And if you look, when we go from D to A over here, so right there, we're going from D to A. I'll undo it. If we're going from D to A, we'll do it in green. Oh, right there, right? We're going that way. Are we changing pressure, or are we changing volume, or are we changing neither? What are we changing?
Pressure.
We're changing pressure. We're decreasing the pressure. The pressure is dropping. How do we know? Because we're going from a pressure of 120 right there, okay? And we're going down to Well, let's think about that. What pressure do you all think it would get to for point A? What would point A be pressure-wise?
And
Isn't it like 10-ish?
It's probably less than 10. Let's go with 5, right? So you might even get close to, darn near close to 0. And don't forget, we're measuring pressure in millimeters of mercury, Hg. Okay. And we're doing volume in milliliters. Okay. And so it's going to get down really, really low. Now, pray tell, any GTA who wants to chime in here, pray tell, why is it important that the left ventricle get so low? Because Caleb, when you go to the doctor, right, and we measure blood pressure right here, right, it's not 120/5. What is it, Caleb?
You get like 120/80.
120/80. What's that about, right? If it's 120/80, why the heck is the left ventricle pressure 120/5, right? That's systolic over diastolic. So why do we, first of all, why is it so low if normal blood pressure is 120/80? Why are we saying blood pressure here is 120/5?
Because you haven't started filling yet and you just did like most of the blood in the ventricle. So this is like, as you can see, it's in between ESV, which is where you've ejected a majority of the blood in the ventricle, and then it's before like diastole has completed or even started a lot. Like that point A is technically the beginning of diastole, but it doesn't instantaneously start. So you start
let
out
me
at a very
let
low
me
pressure.
take over because I actually
So
that during
yeah, hold on, Nadeem. You can add in there. Caleb, yes, that is right, and I'm going to let Nadeem add on to add on to there because there's a little bit of sort of a difference that I'm fishing for. That let's see if Nadeem can
because I
take
struggled with
the-
that. I didn't really understand the whole concept of measuring blood pressure. When we're measuring blood pressure, it's the blood pressure of the aorta. Be very careful with that. It's
So we call that
aortic.
systemic arterial blood
Yes.
pressure.
Yes.
Yep.
So, and the aorta blood pressure does not go low. The reason why the left ventricle pressure goes so low is that because the heart has to be filled with blood. So it goes really low, aortic pressure, the atrial pressure is going to be higher, and then blood is going to start flowing into the ventricles. Be very careful. And during that time, the heart is basically relaxing. So there's going to be a void, just like we're going to get to in lungs as well. Okay?
So,
This is how I understood it.
yes, no, that's a great add-on, and that actually gets to Caleb's point, which was that the left ventricular pressure, it has to get so low, and it has to get so low because that is the only way that we can get blood movement from the left atrium into the left ventricle because that's the only way we can do it, right? Because the left atrium cannot produce a lot of pressure. It can't produce a lot of, like, it's only 10 maybe, right? 10, 15 maybe. It can't produce a lot of pressure. I'd say even maybe less than 10, right? So the only way that we can move blood from the left atrium to the left ventricle is if the left ventricular pressure is lower than left atrial pressure. The only way we can do that is to have it relax so much so that the pressure drops to 4, 5, 6, 7, somewhere around there, right? And so that is why we see in the left ventricular blood pressure drop all the way down to about 5 millimeters of mercury. Both Caleb and Nadeem, you guys hit the nail on the head from other sides. Hunter, did you want to chime in there? Because I saw you kind of like look over. Or you have anything to chime into, or any other remaining thoughts on this part before we move on to naming the phases?
I mean, the only thing I was really gonna think about saying, but I mean, I think they covered it, was just that, in order for the ventricle to refill, the atria has to overcome the amount of pressure in there. And the ventricle is the most heavily muscled part of the heart. And so the atria has to work really hard to try to overcome that. And so that's part of why we see such a significant drop in the pressure before the
Very
volume
good.
actually starts to increase.
Exactly. And actually let's stay on with you, Hunter, because that's a great sort of segue into the first phase. Now, these can be labeled, hear me out, student. These can be labeled in different orders, right? So I'm just calling it the first because we're going to call it the first, right? So between A and B, right? Between A and B, this phase is called ventricular filling. Okay, ventricular filling. Now this could be phase 1, phase 2, phase whatever you label it as, and you'll see it labeled as different numerical values, but it's called ventricular filling. So bearing in mind Hunter and Dom, bearing in mind our sponsor, right? Tell me a little bit about this phase and what is happening during ventricular filling.
So to start, we have passive ventricular filling as the blood is just going from a higher pressure in the atria filling in the ventricle itself.
Well, doesn't that mean you just said it's filling, right? So aren't the atria contracting?
Not until the end. They have the atria.
So how are they filling if they're not contracting?
Just going down the pressure gradient.
But what's creating that pressure gradient?
The stretch of.
Very good. So what's happening is they were stretched,
Yeah.
right, by the blood coming in. And now, just like a rubber band, they are, and here's the term, recoiling. They're recoiling inward and recoiling back, right? It's like if you blow up a balloon, right? You blow up a balloon with air, but you don't tie it off. What happens? Well, if you just let go without tying it off, the elasticity, the inherent stretch of that elasticity, it's going to recoil back towards its original shape, push the air out. That's what's happening with the atrium, right? The left atrium in this. It happens with the right atrium as well, but with the left atrium here. So you're saying that most of the ventricular filling is passive recoil of the left atrium pushing blood into the ventricle. And through what valve does that happen? What valve does blood go through?
Mitral.
Mitral, very good. And what's it also named as?
Bicuspid.
Bicuspid valve, very good. So is that the entirety of the process? Dom and Hunter, Dom Hunter?
James.
Hunter. James. Oh yeah, James squared, both. Yeah, got it. Is that the end? Like, is that all that happens? Or is there an active phase? Because you did say it was mainly passive. And what mechanism utilizes that? Or is utilized?
I mean, it's the very end of filling. We have the atrial kick. We see it towards the end where our it increases.
And pressure goes up a little bit, right?
Yeah,
So
we get that little increase in pressure right there too.
So it's like the last 5 to 10% of ventricular filling, we get active atrial contraction, which we dub atrial kick. We mentioned with our sponsor, Frank Starling Fitness. There we go. And Frank Starling Fitness basically said that it's not afterload, right? It's preload. So what is preload? Like, what is that? Anybody want to chime in here and tell me what preload is?
Well, preload just defines like as the ventricles are filling with blood, we're getting a more optimal stretch. So at rest, at the end of diastole, the cardiomyocytes, they're at a suboptimal stretch. And so as the ventricles fill with blood, it stretches them more and more until they get to an optimal stretch. And then that's where we get the coordinated contraction for ejection.
Exactly. So preload is a measure of the degree of stretch, right? And when we say stretch, it's essentially the degree of overlap of actin and myosin, right? That's why we kind of do this example with our fingers here. Actin and myosin overlap. Now, when the heart is unloaded, what's going to be the load on the heart? Well, the blood, right? The blood is what stretches it. So if there's not blood on there, right, or not a lot of blood in there, the heart is at a suboptimal overlap for maximal force generation. Okay, I'm going to say that again. Unloaded, the heart is at a suboptimal overlap for maximal force generation. So what does that mean? It means that when more blood comes to the heart and stretches that ventricle, right? Now it causes the actin and myosin to be at a more optimal overlap for maximal force generation. So if we look at force generation, if we draw like what the historical Frank Starling mechanism curve sort of looks like here, the curve is going to look something like this, right? It's going to look like, and it's kind of like that. It'll peter off down here. and this is systolic force, right? And this is, you could say, preload, right? We're going to put a P for pre, actually put a pre, I'll put a pre right there. So we'll put a pre-L, right? So that's preload. How do we measure the degree of stretch? Well, one way that we measure it is with end, you guessed it, end diastolic volume. So as you increase the end diastolic volume, you increase the amount of overlap, the more optimal overlap, and therefore you can increase the systolic force. So if this is normal right here, preload, you can increase the preload over, and we'll do a green. You can increase, and if you increase the preload, what does that mean? It means more blood in the heart before contraction. You think, oh my gosh, more blood. How are we going to get that stuff out? That's extra, right? The heart's going to have to work extra hard. Well, no, not necessarily, because you have more optimal overlap for maximal force generation. So therefore, at a higher preload, you can actually get a higher systolic force with essentially it ends up being more efficient. Yes, the energy requirement is a little bit more, but it's not nearly as more. It's not like a 1-to-1 ratio there. It's way, way, way more efficient there. So once again, that's just a little tangent on preload because we got a sponsor, Frank Starling Fitness. We need to make sure we give shout outs to our sponsors. Okay, so we've got our ventricular filling. We're going to call that phase 1 or whatever. Okay, now what happens at B? We already said B is going to be end diastolic volume, right? What else is happening at B?
Isovolemic contraction.
Okay, so we're transitioning from, so B is the transition point from a relaxation of the ventricles to a contraction of the ventricles. And in fact, if you were to draw the line across from point D, a straight line, I don't know if that's going to be straight. That's not bad. This upper portion would be systole, or the contraction portion, systole, and this lower portion would be diastole, right? Or the relaxation portion. So at this point, what else is happening? Yes, we're transitioning from ventricular filling or ventricular diastole to ventricular systole. What else is happening at that point?
The closure of the valves.
Very good. We've got closure of what valve?
The
The valve that was open.
Yeah.
The mitral. Very good. So the mitral valve closes right there. Somebody draw that or annotate on that. That's where right here the mitral valve closes right there. So Hunter, why did the mitral valve close, as Dom is going to be drawing on here? Why did the mitral valve close?
Well, so it's closing because at that point, our ventricular pressure is exceeding that of the atrial pressure.
Very good. So there was a pressure gradient. And remember, the only thing that opens and closes valves in the heart are pressure gradients, right? So there's a higher pressure in the ventricle at that point than in the left atrium, and therefore the mitral valve, which connects those two, closes shut so we don't get what's called mitral regurgitation, or we don't get blood moving from the left ventricle into the left atrium. We know that's not the right direction, so we have to prevent backflow. And some pathologies where you get mitral valve calcification or mitral valve prolapse or mitral valve insufficiency. All of these are pathologies that can affect the mitral valve and actually allow blood to kind of go back the opposite way. And that you'll see will cause a whole slew of problems. But okay, so that's mitral valve closes. What about sounds? Do we know any sounds that occur here? What sounds occur here? The S1 sound. Very good. Remember, S1 sound is a result of the AV valves closing, right? The AV valves closing, that is the mitral valve, which is the bicuspid, and then also called the tricuspid between the the right atrium and the right ventricle. Welcome back, Haley, to Ion Physiology Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. B. Good to have you back. So we have S1 sound happening here. Now remember, this is where Wiki and other places get it wrong. That you don't actually hear the valves slamming shut. They're very thin pieces of connective tissue. What you hear is the rapid deceleration of that blood right? And that rapid deceleration of that blood, or that blood hitting essentially the left ventricular wall and causing turbulent flow, and that resonates or vibrates, if you will, the ventricular wall, right? And that's what you're hearing. That sound is that turbulent flow, that rapid deceleration of the blood as it hits the ventricular wall, causing the wall to vibrate or resonate, right? So that's what you're actually hearing. It's not the valves themselves slamming shut. If a doorway to your room is like the valve, you slam your door and that door actually closing makes the sound. That's not what we're hearing, right? That's not what S1 or S2 are for that matter, okay? All right, so we got mitral valve closes, we got S1, EDV right there, and that's going to lead us into the next phase, right? So before we even name the next phase, let's look at what's happening from B to C. And Dom, feel free to annotate with all different colors and make it all pretty, because your handwriting's way prettier than mine. In fact, I can close. I'll take off all my annotations, and you go ahead and start annotating away. Ready? Here we go. 3, 2, clear my drawings. Yep. Boom. There we go. So from B to C, what is changing, Amy? What's changing, and which way is it going?
The pressure is increasing and
The pressure's
volume.
increasing, right? So it's going up. And what's really important here is also to note what is not changing. It's the volume. The volume is not changing here. Remember, whenever you have a phase that has zero volume change, right? That is we call that iso volumetric. It's the same volume. Iso means same, volumetric is measure of the volume, right? So that's iso, as Dom just wrote there, iso volumetric contraction is happening between B and C. Now, what does that mean? You have no volume is changing, but the pressure is increasing in the ventricle. The ventricle, because it has to drop down so low for blood to move in, it has to drop below the atrial pressure for the blood to move in from the atrium, the left atrium. Now we have to contract up high enough to eject blood from the heart, which means we have to overcome aortic blood pressure, okay? Aortic blood pressure. And so that is essentially what's happening here. The heart is starting to squeeze, right? It's undergoing isovolumetric contraction. We're increasing the pressure until we can overcome the pressure in the aorta, and therefore the aortic valve will open and blood will eject, and that will lead us to our next phase, which is from C to D. That next phase, Nadim, is called
Fill in, or rapid fill in, and then slower.
Very good. So this whole phase is called ventricular filling, and you actually said it you can split it into sub-phases, which is rapid ventricular ejection and reduced ventricular ejection. So we go rapid essentially up to the peak, and then reduced from the peak over to D, right? But
I'm
at the end
sorry,
of the day,
I said fill in, it's ejection. I'm really sorry.
yes, no, you're fine. So the point is, in this phase, blood is moving from the ventricle, the left ventricle, into the aorta, and it's doing that because there's a pressure gradient, right? There's a pressure gradient. That means the pressure is higher in the left ventricle than it is in the aorta, and therefore that valve is going to open up. Now, what we're changing here is you'll see in a lot of PV loops is we are increasing the pressure. You said, well, if we're opening a valve, shouldn't that decrease the pressure? Well, remember, not only are we opening a valve because the pressure is higher, we're continuing to squeeze, or the heart is continuing to contract, right? So draw a line from D to B, Dom. I think if you draw it and hold it, it might, are you annotating or are you drawing?
Annotating.
Okay, so it won't do that. But that line right there represents, above it is systole, the upper right, and below it is diastole. So during systole, it's contracting the entire time, right? So we have contraction. So even though the valve's opening up and blood is ejecting from the heart's continuing to contract to a smaller, a tighter volume in the left ventricle. So therefore, blood is going to be ejected, which means we're going to lose volume, which is what we see. Volume is decreasing, right? But we also see pressure increasing for a good portion of that, okay? Now, the heart's going to continue essentially to contract until point D, right? But as blood is leaving the heart, right, that blood is no longer there to contribute to the blood pressure. So at a certain point in ventricular ejection, there will be, yep, you can draw it right there. At that point, very good, is we actually see pressure start to drop because blood is leaving the ventricle and pressure's dropping, but the heart's still squeezing, but enough blood is leaving and has left so that we actually see a pressure drop. And the pressure is going to drop until we get to point D, right? And point D is referred to, as we said before, end systolic volume. It is the volume in the heart at the end of systole, right? And that AV valve is closing, right? Remember, AV valves are the valves between the atria and the ventricles. This one is a mitral or bicuspid valve between the left atrium and the left ventricle. That AV valve is going to close. Caleb, why did that AV valve close?
The AV valve closes so that there's not backflow back into the ventricle.
So that's why it like the purpose of its closing.
Oh,
but
like
what
how does it
caused
close?
Yeah, what caused it to
Oh,
close? What's the
Well,
precipitating factors that cause it to
so
close?
there's like, so the AV valve actually has like, when
You
you're
don't have to
looking,
give me. I'm just asking for the like. Why did that valve close? What?
like mechanically,
Yes. Why did it close mechanically? Like why does the AV valve close here?
there's like these cups on the underside, which when blood flows back in, pushes it closed.
Okay, so it pushes, right? What
Yeah.
pushes it? I was fishing for just straight up really simple answer right there. You're like getting into the mechanics. That's okay. That's okay. That's good. That means you know
The
it.
blood pushes back on it. And closes.
Yes.
I thought you wanted like the
I'm like,
whole.
man, you're going way too deep here. You're going way too deep. No. Yeah.
I took
the va-
anatomy, so I had to.
You're totally fine. But you're right. You're right. I wanted the simple answer, which is we eventually got there, so that's good. The valve closes because blood pressure in the aorta is now higher than blood pressure in the left ventricle. That's going to push back. It's going to close the valve. You're totally right in that there will be leaflets, sort of cups that will cause or catch that blood flow back from the aorta, the backflow, and cause it to close and keep it closed, right? 100%. But remember, the only thing that opens and closes valves in the heart are pressure gradients, right? So yes, at point D, we have the aortic valve closing because the blood pressure in the aorta is now higher than in the left ventricle. And that leads us into our beginning portion of our relaxation phase. Remember this phase right here, or point D, can often be referred to as end systolic volume. It's the end of systole. And so it's the volume at the end of systole. So that's point D, right? A is not necessarily, even though we've got it drawn there, that's okay. Technically, it's A is not ESV, it's D is ESV. Now, it's okay that Don wrote it that way because it's the same volume, right? It's the same volume. And the reason why we are distinguishing that A is not ESV, but point D is because of the name. And systolic volume. If we're looking at point A, it's actually at the beginning of it's actually at the middle of diastole, right? D is the end of systole and the beginning of diastole. And so A would technically be middle of diastole, right? So that's why technically D is ESV. Some text, you will see it drawn exactly like Dom has it here because they're basically drawing attention to the fact that the difference between the ESV and the EDV is you guessed it, stroke volume, right? That's the volume change in a single heartbeat, right? So from D to A, Haley, what's that phase if you can talk? She can't talk. She's muted.
I can talk.
There we go.
Volumetric relaxation.
Isovolumetric relaxation, right? So this is where the heart is starting to relax. Then once again, why does it have to relax? Well, it needs to relax to lower its pressure below that of atrial pressure, and therefore we start the cycle. We start the cycle again, right? And then we start off with A, which is ventricular filling, and then that goes into isovolumetric contraction. Then that goes into ventricular ejection, and then that goes into isovolumetric relaxation. A couple of cheats right here, if you just kind of commit these to memory. Remember that With your isovolumetric contraction or relaxation, there's no volume change. If there's no volume change, all the valves are closed. All the valves in the heart. That means the semilunar valves, that is the aortic and the pulmonary, and also the AV valves, that is the tricuspid and the mitral valve. All valves are closed in isovolumetric relaxation. One thing we forgot to note, and thank you for drawing that up there, is that S2, it happens at point D. That's S2. And S2 is a sound that we hear as a result. What valve are we closing right there? Well, we're closing the aortic valve, so it's the semilunar valve, right? It's the aortic and the pulmonary valve are the S2 sounds. And once again, that's not the actual valve slamming shut. It's the rapid deceleration of blood up against that ventricle. Okay, so we've got S1 and S2 are physiologic sounds. You can have an S3. S3 can be pathologic or physiologic. S3 is a little bit of an extra sound that comes after S2. And usually that indicates a slightly stiff ventricle. That can happen in athletes, it can happen in children, or it can happen in pregnant women. All of those things are physiologic, right? So non-pathological. But in S3 can also happen in pathological conditions such as ventricular fibrosis or some sort of stiffening of that ventricle. Pathological left ventricular hypertrophy can cause this as well, right? Other conditions exist. You can have an S4. S4 is always pathological. S1 is physiological. S2 is physiological. S3 can be physiological or pathological. S4 is always pathological. Okay, so some just little cheat sheets, little things to know. Remember the ventricular filling. 90% of it is passive. It's passive recoil of the left atrium. Specifically here, we're talking about left atrium, and the last 10% is active atrial contraction, which we call atrial kick. So that's a little bit of extra oomph there. Okay. Y'all, did we cover all the bases with the PV loop? I think we did. Did we miss anything? Make sure you know these backwards and forwards and backwards. There will be quiz questions. There will be exam questions that go over this exact pressure volume loop. If you know this loop and you've got a mental picture of this in your mind, right? It will help you answer not only questions on the exam, but it'll help you fully understand and comprehend what's going on in the heart at the different phases and why it's happening and all that jazz and a bag of potato chips. Anything else? Haley, Caleb, Nadeem, Amy, James, anything else that we need to cover?
I mean, we
All
covered some
right,
of the
that
loops,
brings
but-
us to our second sponsor. A word from our sponsor. We don't want to forget them. If we can get the sponsorship volume good, but let's go ahead and hear a word from our sponsor. Or not, and just say to heck with that sponsor. We didn't care about them anyway. We're sticking with Frank Starling Fitness. No, James, or Haley, does anybody have a sponsor?
Haley?
No, we.
I have sponsors and
Yeah.
different area codes.
Why don't you go ahead and throw out one more sponsorship for this group who's listening to this podcast?
Okay.
Maybe like 2 people.
Yeah, well, we'll say another thank you to Afterload Advisors LLC. If you're worried about rising resistance in your life, just call the Afterload Advisors and they'll help reduce your systemic stress and optimize your cardiac output. They lower your
Good.
resistance so your output can rise. Thank you. Thank you.
There's so many great little nuggets in that. Well
I'm
done.
glad I can contribute something.
Frank Starling Fitness and Afterload Advisors. I love that. That's fantastic. So if you're like, I don't get it, all right, well, then that's indicative that you need to go and study some cardiovascular physiology. You need to review afterload. You need to review pressure, hypertension, stress, all of this stuff, right? Make sure you review it. If you're laughing alongside of us, because these sponsors are fantastic. Thank you, Haley, for bringing that second sponsor. And we're ready to rock and roll with everything. So we are going to, we can stop. Can you stop sharing the screen for us, James? Thank you. Once again, it is a pleasure to have you on this podcast. Thank you so much. I don't know what time we have. I don't know how much time it has been, but it's probably about 45 minutes or so. Keep it short, sweet, to the point. As always, please let us know if you have any questions, comments, snide remarks. We welcome all of those. We would love to have any questions and talk about those on the podcast for next week. Make sure you do not get behind. Okay, do not get behind. Do a little bit each day, and make sure you are studying. Caleb, you got a question, or is that just a little? We're almost done. Or no, he's got a no. Yeah, don't get behind.
Don't get behind.
Don't get behind. That's right. I love it. Don't get behind. We're going to end it like we always end it. As always, y'all, stay cool, stay in school, and don't do drugs. And I will see you next time. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Hit that like button, ring that bell, and we'll see you next time. Peace.